Hey there, guys. All right, and today we are on to week 96B of World War II, June 27th, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, end of the Nazi-Soviet alliance. Without wasting any more time, let's just dive straight into the opening days of Operation Barbarossa.
Well, all I'm saying is I can't believe he actually did it. I mean, and you think, how embarrassing must this be for Molotov? I mean, he had that big hit song and all.
Oh,
Yeah. All right.
Molotov gonna get shot by Stalin for this? I mean, it's a pretty big failure.
June
by Molotov.
27th,
Good.
19...
And he's a good scapegoat for Mr. Stalin. I actually don't know the answer to this one, so someone can tell me.
41. I said it a few days ago on the day it happened, but I'll say it again. This week, Germany invades the Soviet Union.
Dun, 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 dun.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the British attacked German-led Axis forces in North Africa in Operation Battle Axe, but the operation was a failure. The Allied invasion of Vichy French Syria continued, and by the end of the week, the fighting had reached Damascus, and Germany was preparing for an Eastern European invasion of its own. A few things of interest happened in the Middle East this week. On the 21st, as the week begins, Damascus falls to the Allies. Australian troops had arrived at the end of last week, and at 11 a.m., the Vichy French garrison surrenders. Hitler had now lost any chance of an easy descent on Palestine and the Suez Canal. Now, Syria falls under the Middle Eastern Theater of Command for the British. And after the failure of Operation Battle Axe, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill decides that the Middle East needs new blood. He cables Archie Wavell, theater commander, the 21st, that although the victories which are associated with your name will be famous in the story of the British Army, he is relieving him of his command and replacing him with General Sir Claude Auchinleck, who has been in command of the British forces in India. Wavell, in turn, is to be sent to take Auchinleck's former position. Steve Sears has this to say about Wavell. For nearly 2 years, in victory and defeat, Archibald Wavell had kept the Middle East in the Allied column. Certainly no other British soldier in World War II shouldered so many burdens. When the change of command was made public, correspondent Alan Moorhead wrote, "There went out of Cairo in the Middle East that afternoon one of the great men of the war." As for Erwin Rommel, leading the Axis forces in North Africa, this week changes everything for him, too. Adolf Hitler's orders to him are to march in place for the 3 months or whatever it will take to defeat the Soviet Union. Rommel knows that no reinforcements are going to be diverted for him in the near future. What's that about defeating the Soviet Union? Oh yes, the largest land invasion in history begins this week as Germany invades the Soviet Union. The land attack begins at 3:15 a.m. June 22nd, 1941. German bombers hit 66 Soviet aerodromes this day. By noon, over 1,000 Soviet planes have been destroyed.
Damn.
5 cities are targeted by bombers: Kovno, Minsk, Rovno, Odessa, and Sevastopol. They also hit the naval base at Liepaja. And as the shortest night of the year ends, the German army advances along a 930-mile front. That's 1,500 kilometers. The spearhead of Army Group North surges and covers over 60 kilometers that day. Army Group Center captures most of the Bug River bridges intact. By nightfall, the Germans have opened a gap north of Grodno and also taken the fortress towns of Kobrin and Puzhany. The Soviet Red Army has some serious problems straight off the bat. The Western Military District, facing German Army Group Center, are deployed really far forward, but don't have much in the way of prepared defenses. And they weren't warned about the attack pretty much until it's underway. The Soviet 3rd, 4th, and 10th armies here, which ideally will absorb as much of the invasion blow as they can, are concentrated in the Bialystok salient. And the German 2nd and 3rd Panzer Group advances go around them, which is going to make encircling all those men a lot easier. I've talked in the past about the German plans for sending panzer units ahead to create cauldrons of encircled Soviet forces and then destroy or capture them all at once. Bialystok is one such cauldron. The Western District descends into chaos. Here, the Soviet command structure was rendered largely redundant from the very beginning, owing to a near total loss of communication at most levels of the chain of command. The complete disarray prevented coherent knowledge of the current situation from being gathered, and consequently the development and execution of a coordinated Soviet response. The Western military district's hasty slide towards disintegration was worsened by the Soviet High Command's erroneous adherence to pre-war plans, which called for immediate counterattacks. They inevitably resulted in piecemeal attacks of little effect, but carried out at great cost to Soviet forces. Italy and Romania both declare war on the Soviet Union this day. And in Lithuania, the June uprising begins, which we will cover in our War Against Humanity series. On the 23rd, Adolf Hitler arrives at the Wolf's Lair in Rastenburg, East Prussia. At least for the time being, this is where he'll spend the greater part of his time. He tells Alfred Jodl, chief of Wehrmacht operations staff, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels writes, however, in his diary, "We must win, and quickly. The public mood is one of slight depression. The nation wants peace, though not at the price of defeat, but every new theater of operation brings worry and concern." In Moscow that day, an evacuation council is set up. Its purpose is to organize the dismantling and removal of hundreds of armament factories in the western parts of the USSR and their reassembly far to the east, beyond the Urals, beyond any conceivable battle zone, even all the way to Siberia and Kazakhstan. At the end of the day, German Army Chief of Staff Franz Halder says everything is going to plan. Deputy Chief of Staff Friedrich Paulus opines, "It looks like the whole operation will be a short one." Army Commander Walter von Brauchitsch responds, "Yeah, like 6 to 8 weeks."
Oh my God.
But Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, does not share this view so much. He notes the stiff resistance and the catastrophic state of the Soviet roads, but he's also starting to get the idea that closing the big cauldron at Minsk, his first big objective, might not in fact yield the decisive success it has been supposed it will. Bock gets the feeling that maybe they should drive as deep into the Soviet Union as possible to prevent the enemy from building a new defensive line. Hermann Hoth, who leads one Army Group Center Panzer Group, will side with Bock, but the move towards Minsk will remain the goal. Still, the furthest advanced units of both panzer groups already report fuel issues. And even on the 24th, when Vilna and Kaunas have fallen, and Brest-Litovsk is way behind the front lines and coming under attack, the 3rd Panzer Group's war diary notes that road conditions allow for only a single file column, so overall movement is only that of the slowest vehicle on the road. And beyond that, heavily laden vehicles get bogged down because all routes marked as roads turn out to be unsealed, unmaintained sand tracks. The difficulties are placing great demands on the divisions. In fact, several units report road issues, vehicle issues, and fuel issues that are seriously impeding speedy movement.
So one could make the argument that the Soviet Union, being a bit behind on the times in terms of infrastructure development, saved them. I think there could certainly be an argument made for that.
Also, by the end of the first few days, the Germans have been forced to face the reality that the newest Soviet armor, the KV-1 and T-34 tanks, is clearly superior to their own. This has not made any overall difference to the results so far because of the small numbers they've encountered, things like the chaos in the Western District, the lack of ammunition many of those tanks have, and the lack of air cover that leaves them vulnerable to dive bombers. But the appearance of massed Soviet tanks led by the previously unknown T-34s and KV-1s stirred panic among the German Panzerjäger anti-tank units as they watched round after round bounce off the Soviets' impenetrable armor. And facing Army Group North, that did not have the Stuka dive bombers, they were even more impressive. And Ewald von Kleist from Army Group South called the T-34 the finest tank in the world. I read in Glance and Houses When Titans Clash that on the 24th, just 51 KV-1 and KV-2 tanks engaged the 6th Panzer Division on the Dubisa River. They stopped the Germans for 2 days, and this happens in spite of the fact that the Soviet tanks run out of gas and are just sitting there as little invulnerable lumps with guns. The Germans have nothing that can penetrate their armor until finally they bring up some 88 guns and can destroy them. Then they find out that a lot of the Soviet tanks couldn't even fire because they haven't been bore-sighted, and they've had orders to just ram the German tanks. Still,
What?
by the 25th, the Germans already threatened to close one of their cauldrons. The Bialystok salient could be encircled from the south, and the deeper cordon is to be hopefully closed at Minsk in a few days. Hoth and Guderian closed the first circle near Baranovichi. Daugavpils falls in the north. Also this day, Finland declares a state of war with the Soviet Union, and what will be known as the continuation war begins. Sweden says it will allow Germany to move forces of up to a division in size through Sweden from Norway to Finland for the fight. German General Lemelsen of the 47th Panzer Corps protests the 25th about the senseless killings of
Can we just say it is truly amazing how Sweden is managing to just stay out of it? Like, they're just chilling.
Soviet civilians and POWs. His protest is ignored. He will next week vigorously protest that still more shootings of prisoners of war and deserters have been observed, conducted in an irresponsible, senseless, and criminal manner. This is murder. The German army is waging war against Bolshevism, not against the Russian people. He does, however, have no problem with Hitler's order to immediately execute all political commissars captured. Joseph Goebbels notes in his diary the 25th, "I am refraining from publishing big maps of Russia. The huge areas involved may frighten the public. And the huge areas of Belarus, forests and corn..."
God, Goebbels, the thing about Goebbels that's so terrifying, and I think I've said this before, he truly did understand people, like how they think and how to, like, I still think ultimately in terms of long term, Goebbels' ideas are just fundamentally incapable of succeeding and brainwashing the world, or well, enough people in the world to maintain control. I think it's just impossible. But in the short term, he knew what he clearly worked well.
Fields are already filling up with Soviet partisan fighters who make countless ambushes on any vulnerable units too far forward or behind their support. By the 26th, Erich von Manstein's 41st Panzer Corps with Army Group North reached Dvinsk, taking the road and rail bridges across the Dvina River. They are now nearly 300 kilometers inside the Soviet Union. However, they have to pause now for nearly a week to wait for the 16th Army to catch up with them as it is on foot and horse. The Germans note, though, that Army Group South is moving slowly, and the Red Army command there is anything but chaotic. But this is where the Soviets thought the main blow would come, and so they have their mech units here and their strongest military districts. Konstantin Rokossovsky's 9th Mechanized Corps, for example, manages to hold the Germans back for 2 days before Rovno. This delaying action and the actual fighting for Rovno, which itself takes a few days, showcases what the Soviets might really be capable of, and has Hitler already considering that he might need to divert some forces from Army Group Center to down south. That same day, Red Army Chief of Staff Georgy Zhukov has returned to Moscow from Tarnopol and gets Stalin's approval to set up an emergency defense system on the line Drissa, Polotsk, Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, Mozhir,
Gonna be able to move
and a
faster
further
than the
line
Germans,
to the
though?
east from Sezharovo, Smolensk, Roslavel to Gomel. Hungary and Slovakia declare war on the USSR. On the 27th, the official German occupation of Lithuania begins. Meanwhile, in Leningrad, building work comes to a halt as 30,000 construction workers and their equipment are sent out of the city to dig anti-tank ditches and concrete casemates. Organized Soviet partisan groups are already this day being set up to fight behind enemy lines. Nikita Khrushchev, secretary of the Ukrainian Communist Party, gives the
Oh, I've never heard that man's name before. Well, I'm sure he won't become someone very, very important to Russian history.
order for small groups of these to be formed in Kamenets-Podolsk. Around 2,000 men get together in 140 groups in Lvov, Tarnopol, Chernowitz, Rovno, and Stanislavov, and then slip through the German lines and into enemy territory to wreak havoc. Also the 27th, British cryptographers at Bletchley Park break the Enigma key used by the German army in the invasion. It's called Vulture and provides daily readings of German military orders. Churchill will have this intel given to Joseph Stalin, but insists that its sources remain secret. So Cecil Barclay, a military intel officer at the British Embassy in Moscow, will pass on German intentions and maneuvers to Soviet military intelligence. But how successful is the invasion so far? I mean, there is no question that the Germans have taken a lot of territory, and Red Army losses have been enormous in just a few days. The breakthroughs have been achieved, and the panzers, with the infantry slowly plodding behind, are heading towards their first main objectives. On the other hand, the collapse that German high command predicted would rapidly come has not. In spite of the chaos and failures of the Soviet command, Red Army soldiers are resisting to the last man, and German losses are a lot higher than they'd expected, though sustainable for the near future. The new Soviet armor, though badly led and poorly operated, is better than that of the Germans. There is also the unavoidable issue of the terrible state of the roads and the long distances needed to be covered, and how they're going to manage to get wheeled transport through at all. And what does this mean for other parts of the world? I mean, last year, when the Germans were running across Western Europe, the Chinese were anxious about what that might mean for future commitments to their struggle against the Japanese. But with Britain holding out and continued British and American support, and at least goodwill from the Soviet Union, that worry had been mitigated. But now on the 22nd, when 3 million Germans march into the Soviet Union, the war in Europe has all been changed. And that affects the war in Asia. Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Chinese nationalists in Chongqing, knew from intelligence leaks that war between the USSR and Germany might happen, sure. And after Japan and the USSR signed a neutrality treaty 2 months ago, he aired his thoughts both that the US would be drawn into the war in Asia, or that Japan might go ahead and attack the Soviets anyhow. So he envisioned a big new role for himself as a key ally of both Moscow and Washington. Now the Comintern, the Communist International, trying to make sure of its alliances, demands that Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communists cooperate more with Chiang and the nationalists. The Central Committee of the CCP says it will cooperate with anyone: the nationalists, the British, the Americans, Martians, anyone who opposes the fascist rulers of the Axis powers. And on the 22nd, Zhao Fohai, second in command in Wang Jingwei's Chinese collaborationist government in Nanjing, writes in his diary that everyone thinks Germany will take Moscow within 2 months. And as for the future, if Chongqing joins the Allies and they win, and this is good for China. But if they lose, then that might be pretty bad for Chiang Kai-shek, but because of the collaborationist government, it might be okay for China. And he feels good that China has a foot in both boats. And this week comes to an end with the fall of Damascus, a change in British high command, and a 3 million man invasion. But this offensive is not being fought as the earlier German ones were. As John Keegan writes, already from the beginning, the battles already this week are fought with a brutality and ruthlessness not yet displayed in the Second World War, perhaps not seen in Europe since the struggles between Christians and Muslims in the Ottoman Wars of the 16th century. Not only did many encircled Russians, unlike all but the most intransigent Frenchmen, fight with the tenacity of despair, they were attacked by the Germans with a pitiless ferocity that no Norwegian, Belgian, Greek, or even Yugoslav soldier had yet to face. But of course, Hitler had demanded this method of his ideological war on Bolshevism. I spoke about the Commissar Decree when it was issued at the end of March, and I'm going to close today reading it again, as it is of primary importance to the conduct of the invaders and the resolve of those invaded. The war against Russia is such that it cannot be conducted in a knightly fashion. The struggle is one of ideologies and racial differences, and will have to be conducted with unprecedented, unmerciful, and unrelenting harshness. All officers will have to rid themselves of obsolete ideologies. I know that the necessity for such means of making war is beyond the comprehension of your generals, but I insist that my orders be executed without contradiction. The commissars are the bearers of ideologies directly opposed to National Socialism. Therefore, the commissars will be liquidated. Things are gonna get nasty.
I think they already are. I mean, they're gonna get
If
worse.
you've just recently joined this channel, you can go back to the beginning of how.
And that was week 96B of World War II, June 27th, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, end of the Nazi-Soviet alliance. Now, this was, I think, a much better paced video, and also really goes back to my thing that I said in the previous video, where ultimately I don't think week 96A was a necessary thing at all. I think they could have really just had this be one video. I don't think we needed the, all of the military numbers and stuff and where all the generals were. I really do not think that was needed in terms of the comprehension of what is going on. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.